The first AngularFire service we're going to take a look at is the $firebaseAuth service. This service handles user authentication for us. The first topic of user authentication that we probably want to consider for our application is registration of users. That is, how users actually create accounts in our application. And we're likely going to want to have them authenticate or create an account using their email and password. So let's go ahead and create a form that uses the ng-submit directive, which specifies we want to invoke the register function, passing in the register form email and register form password. And those are simply the models included in our input elements of our form. Similarly, we're going to want to allow users to log into our application after they've created an account. And to do that, we want a form that invokes the login method, accepting again the email and password, but this time from the input elements of our login form. And lastly, we're going to want to allow our users to log out, and we'll want some functionality to check to see if the user is logged in or not. Of course, now we need to create these register, login, logout, and isLoggedIn methods in our myController controller. That controller is located in our app.js file and is set up from our previous section where we added AngularFire to our application. Now I'm going to go ahead and define a local variable in that controller called authObj. And I'm going to initialize this variable in our activation function. I'm going to initialize it to an instance of the $firebaseAuth service. I'm then going to initialize our scopes methods. And now we're ready to define those methods in our controller. Let's simply do them in order, beginning with our register method. We'll define our register method as accepting an email and password as its parameters. And we're going to call the authObj.$createUser with email and password function. This accepts that email is the first parameter and password is the second parameter. This is simply a method included in that $firebaseAuth service. And this method returns something called a promise. A promise can have one of two outcomes. Either it can succeed, in which case it will call its .then method, which accepts a callback function, or it will fail, in which case we need to catch the error it sends back and do something with that error. We'll discuss promises more in the next section, but for now, all we need to concern ourselves with is that we're calling the $createUser with email and password method, and then we're going to log in our user using that same email and password. So of course that means we need to define the login function as well, and that login function accepts the same parameters, email and password. And rather than calling $createUser with email and password, it calls the $signin with email and password. And that sign in with email and password again returns a promise which we need to handle. In this case, we're simply going to log a message to the console to indicate the promise resolved successfully, or we're going to catch the error that promise returns and indicate that it failed with the error message. And finally, we need to define our isLoggedIn and logout methods. Our isLoggedIn method is simply going to print if the $getAuth method returns a null object or not. If the object is null that it returns, then we know that our user is not logged in. Otherwise, they are logged in. And for our logout method, we're simply going to invoke the $signout method. Let's go to our browser and see these methods in action. When we fill out the registration form, and click the submission button, we notice that it says the user was created successfully and we are logged in as that user. And what's really cool is if we go to our Firebase console and our project and then navigate to our authentication section, we'll see that that user we just created is now stored in our authentication of our project. And that means that we can go back to our project and actually log in now as that user. And that login works successfully. We can check to see if that user is logged in, and it returns true. Then we can log out, which it indicates we did successfully. And again, if we check to see if our user's logged in now, it says false. That's really cool. We've added authentication to our Angular application.